We're now just moments away from watching Texas history in the making.
The evidence is substantial. It is alarming and unnerving.
Attorney General Ken Paxton faces an impeachment trial.
And they are showcasing their absolute contempt for the electoral process.
But will he lose his job? After years of accusations of abuse of office, today the truth unfolds on the floor of the Senate. Spectrum News Texas reporters are under the dome, in the gallery, and on the steps of the Capitol, giving you a front row seat to watching democracy in action. Our live coverage of the Ken Paxton impeachment trial starts right now.
Thanks for joining us for our special Gavel to Gavel coverage. I'm Karina Kling. Joining me throughout this process is Dr. Nicole Cross and Brett Shipp.
And we are about a half hour away from the start of this trial. Paxton faces 20 articles of impeachment related to bribery, abuse of office, and obstruction. Now he will be judged by a jury of the rest of the Senate lawmakers.
That's right. Each day we will bring you the impeachment proceedings live, along with a full breakdown of the major moves and players in this trial, starting right now.
Here is a look at how this trial will work.
It's not a civil or criminal trial, but a political one. But it will look like trials you've seen before, just in a different setting, the Senate chamber. Ken Paxton must attend. He or his team will enter a plea, and he can choose whether to take the stand to testify. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick will act as judge. The House Board of Managers are the prosecutors, and members of the Texas Senate will be the jury. There are 31 members of the Texas Senate, 19 Republicans, 12 Democrats. One of those Republicans is Paxton's wife, and she cannot vote. But more on that in a minute. Just like a criminal trial, the senators will hear arguments, testimony, and then deliberate before voting yes or no on each article of impeachment. By the way, an article of impeachment is like a legal charge if this was a criminal trial, not a political one. Now back to Paxton's wife. Senator Angela Paxton will not have much of a say in the process due to a conflict of interest. She must attend but cannot vote or be part of closed-door deliberations. So in what scenario is the Attorney General removed from office? If there is a guilty verdict on even one of the 20 impeachment articles, Paxton is out. In the end, it will take 2/3 of the senators to vote yes to any one article of impeachment to remove him from office. If all 12 Democrats vote to convict, 9 of the remaining 18 Republican senators would have to support conviction to remove Paxton from office. If Paxton is found not guilty, he can return to work.
Taking a live look of the Senate chamber where the suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton will go on trial beginning around 9 o'clock today. We're just about 10 minutes out from that. The road to Paxton's impeachment trial has been a long one. Let's take a look at just how we got here.
Ken Paxton's been mired in long-running scandals and legal battles for most of his tenure as the state's top lawyer. But it was after he asked Texas lawmakers to spend public money on a proposed multi-million-dollar settlement that the impeachment process began. Paxton wanted the money to end a lawsuit by former staffers who accused him of on-the-job retaliation. On May 24th, House investigators publicly detailed allegations of a years-long pattern of misconduct by Paxton. On May 25th, a House committee unanimously recommended Paxton be impeached and removed from office. 2 days later, the Republican-led Texas House overwhelmingly voted to impeach him on articles including bribery and abuse of public trust. Impeachments only happened 2 other times in state history: Governor James Ferguson in 1917 and State District Judge O.P. Carrillo in 1975. Paxton's impeachment triggered his immediate suspension from office. He hired a team of legal heavyweights to defend him. The House lined up its own set of star attorneys to prosecute Paxton. Since then, Paxton's team has tried to get rid of the impeachment charges against him, claiming they're unsubstantiated. They also cite the forgiveness doctrine, saying voters chose to re-elect Paxton to a 3rd term even though they knew about alleged wrongdoings before casting a ballot. But the House impeachment lawyers argue voters didn't know all the details because Paxton tried to conceal them. And in mid-August, the House team released thousands of pages of evidence against the Attorney General. Paxton's team says he will not testify at his impeachment trial in the Texas Senate, but senators who will serve as jurors could compel him to do so.
All rise. The Court of Impeachment of the Texas Senate is now in session.
And this is a very significant and serious occasion that will be in the history books. Attorney General Paxton, please rise. Clerk, please read the articles of impeachment, one at a time, preferred by the House of Representatives.
The allegations that I just heard are untrue. Therefore, Ken Paxton pleads not guilty. What is being attempted here hasn't happened in our state in 100 years. And unlike other efforts of the past like this one, this scheme was rushed, it was secretive, it was poorly planned, and was wholly unsupported by evidence. Almost 30 million people live in the state of Texas. Texans chose at the voting booth who they wanted to be their Attorney General, despite the same baseless allegations that are being made here. But because of what this House has done, only 30 people out of almost 30 million will decide whether Ken Paxton is allowed to serve in the office he was voted into.
In the articles reveal that the state's top lawyer engaged in conduct designed to advance the economic interests and legal positions of a friend and donor to the detriment of innocent Texans. Mr. Paxton turned the keys of the Office of Attorney General over to Nate Paul so that Mr. Paul could use the awesome power of the People's Law Firm to punish and harass perceived enemies. Sam Houston, who on this day in 1836 was elected president of a new and free republic, reminded Texans, do right and risk the consequences. Sometimes we must do the right thing in the face of enormous pressure to remain silent. The witnesses felt this pressure.
Didn't you want to make sure that you were absolutely sure that Ken Paxton was doing something untoward and illegal before you went to the FBI? Is it possible, Mr. Mateer, that you jumped to a lot of conclusions really fast?
I don't believe so, sir.
And you could have put all this to bed if you'd just talked to your boss.
I attempted to talk to him starting probably in June, July, August, September.
No.
I did.
Take it easy.
I did talk to him, sir.
Take it easy.
I was very happy to be removed from that file. I was quite frankly sick of dealing with Nate Paul.
Is that the third time you've now been asked within 6 months to review a matter that involved Nate Paul?
Yes.
I think the thing that's really strikes me, Brad, is that Mateer started being asked questions yesterday, and for the majority of this day, there was Jeff Mateer, and that tells us a lot. That tells us exactly what the prosecution and the defense think of Jeff Mateer. Probably not for his style, but probably for how important he is when it comes to this case.
At no point after you reported to law enforcement were you terminated from your position. It's a yes or no question, Mr. Bangert. Were you fired or were you not fired?
I was constructively discharged.
No.
You're being referred to by the Attorney General, all of you, as rogue employees?
Yes, sir.
What was your reaction when you heard that allegation?
It was hurtful.
And welcome back to our continuing coverage of the impeachment trial of suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton. The latest person to take the stand is David Maxwell. He is among those who sued, claiming he was improperly fired by Paxton after reporting him to the FBI.
What crime would it be to investigate the legality? If that's a crime, I'm going to be on death row. I investigate the legality of search warrants all the time. That's what I do. What crime is it, Ranger, for them to ask you to investigate the legality of a search warrant?
The only purpose
No, sir. Objection non-responsive. What crime is committed?
Objection, he didn't allow him to finish so we could see whether it's responsive or not. I believe it was going to be responsive. Objection to interrupting the witness.
Overruled, sustained, but
I'll ask again. And I'll
ask again, take a pause.
And I'll calm down.
Charlotte, talk to us about the mood in the room. I've seen some of the lawmakers just with David Maxwell in the stand laughing at, kind of snickering at some of the exchanges between the attorneys and David Maxwell, and a lot of them have a pretty relationship that goes back pretty far, it seems, too.
Yeah, I think that the interest here is really high. David Maxwell presented himself as someone with a lot of experience. We all know that he has a lot of experience, and he had a great career with the Texas Rangers and with the Attorney General's office before things went south. So I think you saw a lot of the senators really leaning in to hear what he had to say. They were taking notes, and I think David Maxwell really proved the point that he had tried over and over and over again to tell his boss, Attorney General Ken Paxton, that they should not be working with Paul. He believed Paul was running a Ponzi scheme. He knew that he was being investigated by the FBI, and he believed that if they had investigated federal agencies that were looking into Paul, that could be obstruction of justice.
Are now beginning week 2 of this trial, and they have begun over in the Senate chamber with Mark Penley, one of the whistleblowers who also sued, taking the stand this morning.
How was Mr. Paul acting in this meeting in terms of who was in charge and what was going to happen here?
Mr. Paul acted like we didn't understand who the real boss was. It wasn't the Attorney General, it was him. We were the only ones that could stop it, and we had to.
Would you do anything differently?
No, sir, I'd do the same thing all over again because it was the right thing to do and the only thing we could do.
You don't have any evidence that Nate Paul ever paid any type of bribe to Ken Paxton, do you?
I disagree with your statement.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what evidence you have that Nate Paul paid Ken Paxton any type of bribe. Go.
Nate Paul was claiming there was a grand conspiracy between a federal judge, 2 federal prosecutors, at least 2 state agencies represented as task force officers, and a number of FBI agents. Nate Paul filed a civil suit against 100 law enforcement agents in federal court in Austin over this. And I thought to call the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, we have any belief that career AUSAs would be altering search warrants is crazy, especially when they have an ongoing investigation that's privileged.
The ethics advice in 2018 was that when you try to keep things secret and you're a statewide elected official who's running for office, that it could be both ethically, legally, and morally challenging, and that it was beginning to bleed over into the office.
Probable cause would give rise to justification for an arrest.
You didn't have justification for an arrest, did you?
We were at the point of making a determination of whether to move forward with an investigation.
There was no indictment, right?
Correct.
There was no arrest, right?
Correct.
And yet, you came here in front of all these fine people and told us a bunch of maybes. Isn't that right?
I came here and answered questions about the memo.
Bailiff will bring in Mr. Kamek.
I mean, I was convinced by what I was shown in the search warrant presentation and all that.
Had you already formed a personal belief as to what you thought was going on here?
No, not a personal belief. I was just like, hey, if what he's showing me on how the search warrant was altered is true, this is a big deal. I never would have imagined in a million years getting that call to sitting in an impeachment hearing, sir.
You would agree with me, Mr. Kamek, that was not your purpose. You were not there trying to benefit Nate Paul or his business entities. That's not why you agreed to get involved in this. Agreed?
Absolutely not. I didn't even know Nate Paul or his entities or anything like that.
I think we're getting to the point in this trial now as we come down to the final few days and the final few hours and whatnot. They still haven't answered the question, why? Why in the world was Ken Paxton helping this guy at every turn?
Haven't gotten to that, and I'm starting to wonder if we're going to get to that.
Andrew Wicker was Ken Paxton's executive aide who had really intimate details to share today.
Your witness.
Thank you.
So fair to say there's no animosity or bad blood between you and the Paxtons?
Not from me, no.
Are you part of some vast conspiracy to harm them?
No.
What kind of things was he asking the office to do?
Objection, Your Honor, that's hearsay.
Let me go back and do it exactly the same way that he just overruled. Is this the same person who was talking to Nate Paul and Ken Paxton about Mitty?
Yes.
And what kind of things was he asking the office to do?
Objection, assumes facts not in evidence. No one's established he was asking for anything. Hearsay.
What was he asking of the office?
Again, Your Honor, she just asked the exact same question. Hearsay and assumes facts not in evidence.
I understand why he doesn't want this in, Your Honor, but can we stop the clock again?
No, we're not going to stop the clock each moment we haven't throughout the trial. If there's a long delay, I will stop the clock and give you time back.
If a burner phone is a phone, a plastic phone that you can buy at a convenience store with a certain amount of minutes, and when it's over, you break it and throw it in the trash. General Paxton never had anything like that, did he?
Not to my knowledge, no.
He never had any burner phone, did he?
Not under that definition, no, sir.
Okay.
What's been the mood like in the Senate chamber as, I mean, we're hearing firsthand account now from Drew Wicker. Thought we were going to hear from Laura Olson, the alleged mistress, earlier today, but now looking like that will be this afternoon.
Yeah, I think the mood among senators is they seem really interested right now. Senator Angela Paxton, who's Ken Paxton's wife, hasn't been taking as many notes as we've seen her take throughout the rest of the trial, and she's just really listening into what Andrew Wicker is saying. Andrew Wicker was was Ken Paxton's executive aide who had really intimate details to share today about Paxton and how he was trying to skirt around using official lines of communication. I think that there was a collective oh my gosh in the room when you heard Wicker say that Paxton had been using Wicker's phone at times, maybe 3 or 4 times, to make phone calls. Wicker doesn't know to whom or about what, but he never knew because Paxton was wiping those call logs. And I think you really saw these intimate details from Wicker because Wicker was his executive aide who had access to Paxton that perhaps whistleblowers who have been on the stand the past few days haven't had. Wicker had been to Paxton's house and had details about, possibly Nate Paul paying for a kitchen remodel, or at least having input on the Paxton's home kitchen remodel, and how he had 2 extra phones that he was using to communicate with people. So you got these details, and one more thing I'll add is that Wicker was at a hotel with his own family where he saw Paxton and Paxton's mistress getting out of an elevator, and we should expect to hear from Laura Olson later today, but because of technical issues, she wasn't the first witness today. So I think there was a lot of interest in the room as we started to get into, as you say, the more salacious details of the trial.
I was the chief of staff for United States Senator Jim Bunning in Washington, D.C., and I went to Knight Law School during that time. I think Ken Paxton lied to the public for 2 years about our case. So not only did we not have discovery, he did the opposite and lied to the public about our allegations. He abused the entire office of the Attorney General of Texas to benefit Nate Paul. And it got worse and worse and worse as the year progressed.
Well, I guess there's kind of an old saying in the legal profession that his name's on the wall. It's his agency, and he's the duly elected Attorney General. So it's his law firm. He gets to see a file if he wants to see it.
If there were such a conspiracy, would you still be working at the Attorney General's office?
No, I would not. I accepted promotion in this agency at a very critical time, and I assured myself and assured my wife if there were ever anything that I saw that were illegal or unethical, I would step away. And I'm still here. I'm proud of the work we do. I'm proud to serve General Paxton. I'm proud to be part of this agency.
Did you personally respond to our discovery requests?
Yes, I did.
Did you personally have a conversation with me about Proton email?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
I don't know what to say to that, Your Honor. We're both here.
I'm going to overrule. You can answer the question.
Thank you.
Can you restate the question for me? I'm sorry.
Did you personally have a conversation with me about Ken Paxton's Proton email?
I do remember that conversation, yes.
I mean, you've heard the term garbage in, garbage out, right?
I've heard the expression.
So if Brett Webster is giving you information that's not true, then your analysis is wrong, correct?
I
I have to rely on the information given to me.
I appreciate that. My question is a little bit different. If Brett Webster's not telling you accurate information, then all the analysis you gave on direct examination is all incorrect.
Objection, speculation.
He knows.
You're saying that if he presented false, if he presented false information to me, and I'm using that false, yes, it could affect my analysis.
Mr. President, members of the Senate sitting as Court of Impeachment, over the last 2 weeks, the Senate has faithfully carried out its constitutional duty to listen to the evidence. The framers of our Constitution placed a heavy and solemn responsibility on this chamber. The House did not come here lightly. We discovered unprecedented abuse in the Texas Attorney General's office by Mr. Paxton. As elected officials, we take an oath to protect the citizens of this state and the sacred public trust. The Constitution charges us with policing our own. If we don't keep public officials from abusing the capacity of their offices, then frankly, no one can. Mr. Paxton's attorneys like to remind everyone that he was elected by 4.2 million voters, but they have blindly ignored the fact that he has ultimately ended up serving one person, himself.
Here we are in the Senate chamber in the most historic trial that's been had in this state in the last 100 years on this evidence. There is shame here, and the shame sits right there that they would bring this case in this chamber with no evidence. I am proud to represent Attorney General Ken Paxton. If this can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. Now, you heard when we started this case, you heard in the media that the evidence is 10 times worse than the public knows, but what a farce that was.
This is not about me. It's not about Ken Paxton. It's about whether or not you have a reasonable doubt. I suspect he did some things that you probably didn't like. I get that. I understand that. But that's not the issue. The issue is whether the proof is there that is so convincing that it convinces you beyond a reasonable doubt, the same standard of proof that's in a death penalty case. It's not. It's not. It's not. 2 words. 2 words. Not guilty. Thank you.
Senator Colcourse, nay. Senator Betancourt, nay. Senator Creighton, nay. Senator Middleton, nay.
I feel it's important to set the full record straight on this trial because I want people in the future to have a full picture of what happened and how did we get here. I have had a total view of this process from the very first day the House sent over the articles of impeachment to us in May. With all due respect to the House, we didn't need to be told in the final arguments how important this vote was. I believe the quote was, "This will, if you're like me, be the hardest and most difficult and the heaviest vote that you will ever cast in your time in the legislature. This vote will be the vote you're remembered for most." Our members already knew that and have known that for the last 3 months. If only the House members who voted for impeachment would have followed that instruction in the House, we may not have been here. In the next regular session, we should amend the Constitution on the issue of impeachment as currently written that allowed this flawed process to happen. Any testimony given in a House impeachment investigation must be given under oath, and the target of that impeachment must be allowed to present with a lawyer to cross-examine the witnesses. Otherwise, people can say anything they want without any accountability or need to be truthful because there is no threat of perjury. Millions of taxpayer dollars have been wasted on this impeachment. 31 senators and a large Senate staff that made this trial possible have put their family life, their jobs, their business on hold for the last 3 months after already being here from January to June. I'm going to call next week for a full audit of all taxpayer money spent by the House from the beginning of their investigation in March to their final bills they get from their lawyers.
And there you have it. The Texas Senate has adjourned. Ken Paxton has been acquitted. He is able to return to office, and they are done with this trial after going through the votes of the 16 articles of impeachment, dismissing the other 4 that they did not hear on this. I'm Karina Kling. I'm joined by our political analyst, Republican Ted DeLisi, Democrat Ed Espinoza, and trying to kind of unwind what we just heard. The Lieutenant Governor as well, just really laying into the Texas House for bringing these articles of impeachment in the first place in what he called a rushed process. He said that the Attorney General should have never been suspended from the job while this happened.
Well, he proposed a constitutional amendment to
change
that.
it.
He did,
yeah.
Sure. He said Washington doesn't work that way. This needs to be changed.
Right.
But he minced no words.
No, he minced no words in what he has said. He's been very quiet throughout this whole process and has tried to be as impartial as possible. I know you guys can weigh in one way or the other on that, but I mean, his speech just now almost became the news.
His speech was the news. And, he talked about process and tradition and history while wanting to change process and tradition and history. And let's call it what it was. That was a full-on berating of the Texas House. Yeah. How dare they bring charges, not just against Attorney General, but let's read between the lines here, against a fellow Republican. Remember Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican. And I think that's an important phrase to remember today because that was on full display here with your constant 14-16 votes.
Well, I mean, Ted, let's talk about that because the pretty consistent 14-16. That meant there were 2 Republicans who joined with the 12 Democrats that are in the House, Senator Robert Nichols, Senator Kelly Hancock. What does that mean for the 2 of them?
Well, after the speech I just heard, I think it means that, they may not be in the Lieutenant Governor's good graces going forward. I think that's a fair statement. I think that Senator Hancock, pretty well-known, well-publicized split with the Lieutenant Governor over Winter Storm Uri and the policy behind that. Remember, he was stripped of his chairmanship of Business and Commerce Committee, really as a result of his sort of disagreement and kind of siding with Abbott and Phelan about how to respond to the storm. We may recall that Lieutenant Governor Patrick coming down and asking questions of the PUC commissioners as a result of that. But look, let's be clear that the Senate, behind the scenes, I think, understood that you can't take politics out of politics, Karina. Mm-hmm. And I think we saw that the Senate was really unhappy that they had constitutionally to do this. I think that you heard from the Lieutenant Governor, pretty clearly that he was, he thought that the process had been shortchanged in the House. Quoted extensively from one of the senior members of the House that voted against it. And so, the next, it's hard, and I know we're kind of here looking at the politics of the Paxton thing, but I don't think the outcome was very surprising. No. And so we had talked about a little bit, there was some conversation this morning about this being a purely party line vote. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It didn't turn out to be a purely party line vote. Senator Robert Nichols, kind of a senior member, and then Kelly Hancock, I think we're consistently voting with the 12 Democrats. That's the 16-14, far away from 21, far away from 21. And then Paxton goes to work, I think immediately. I think when this order is entered in today, I think he's Attorney General maybe by even close of business today.